Welcome to the State of the Markets podcast. I'm Paul Rodriguez of thinktrading.com.
I'm Tim Price of pricevaluepartners.com.
And our very special returning guest is Grant Williams.
Grant Williams, welcome back to the show.
Boys, it's so good to hear. So I was going to say to see you again, to hear you again. How are you both? Good?
Not too bad, thanks.
Very good, thanks.
Hello, boys.
Yeah, so just
Excellent.
you know, you were last on, I bet you can't believe, 4 years ago. February 2020.
No way. Was it really 4 years ago?
Yes, 4 years ago.
I think
cow.
times started moving in strange ways since the whole COVID era began. That's my take.
Mate, I would have said 2 max. That's extraordinary.
It really is, yeah.
Wow.
So for the benefit of people who won't know, and which I suspect is not many of our listeners, would you care just to introduce yourself with a brief CV, a précis of your career?
Oh God, really? Going to make me do that?
Could I just say, just before you do that, Grant, that you described yourself as a frustrated PGA golfer last time.
Well, all that's happened in the interim, Paul, is I've become more frustrated and less of a PGA golfer. So, that's a constant progression in my life. My level of frustration, my golfing ability has just peaked. It's not crescendoed yet. It just continues to peak. It's extraordinary.
But I was trying to think how our paths met, and I suspect it was probably through the exchange of commentaries going back probably 10, 15 years now.
Yeah, no, it would be about 15 years, Tim. It would be about 15 years.
So how would you care to self-describe for people who don't know you?
Oh, geez. I hate doing these. Every time if I'm ever in a conference giving a speech and they do the bio thing before the stage, I try and get up on the stage and go, right, come on, no one needs to know.
Strategist, investment commentary, professional,
Real vision.
Yeah,
that's right.
professional.
I was in the markets as a practitioner for 35 years, I guess, in bonds, equities, both kind of European and mostly Asian. I spent a lot of time out in Asia, and then I had this crazy idea with some friends to go into the financial media business about 10 years ago, and that's kind of where I've been ever since. And it's been an interesting journey in many, many ways. As I'm
and
sure
has
you
it
two know
ever
with
been
your own
more
dabbling.
batshit than what you're living through now?
Every day I try and find a way to answer that with a no, but I'm struggling. I really am. I mean, it's the old saying about "May you live in interesting times." Boy, oh boy, oh boy. The one thing I comfort myself with regularly is that this will be a period.
That's my go-to mechanism.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. I totally understand that, Tim. But I'm in the Cayman Islands, and all the pubs are shut on a Sunday. So Sunday is normally my day of reflection. So unfortunately, I'm bereft of alcohol on those days. But this this is going to be a period that people are going to talk about and write books about for centuries to come, probably, and we're living it, which is kind of a wild thing. And so I try and focus on it that way, that having the chance to live through this is actually
A privilege rather than a chore.
Well, I would say it's definitely a chore, but it is a privilege as well. Maybe not an equal amount, but I'm certainly aware that living through history is an extraordinary thing.
Where should we begin then? Where do you want to start off in terms of trying to analyse what on earth is going on in the world right now?
Boy, oh boy. Yeah, well, I mean, the easy answer, especially today, is to say Trump and terrorists. But I think it goes so much deeper and so much further back than that. And when I've been having these kinds of conversations for some time now, actually, I did an experiment in my letter in April, and I contacted 5 very good friends of mine with whom I've had lots of private conversations about the world and where it's headed and why and all the kind of causes of it, both recent and distant. And I asked each one of them if they'd write me a short essay about the times we're living in. And I deliberately gave them a very, very broad brief, which was, write whatever you want about whatever you want. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about where you feel we are in the world. And I brought those together and sent that letter to my subscribers. And our mutual friend Tony Deedon was one of them. Our other mutual friend Stephen Wilkinson was another. And a guy called Andrew McDermott, who's a good friend of mine out in the US. Another guy, Roger Mitchell, who I do my sports podcast with. And we put these essays together, and the theme that ran through all of them was Neil Howe and Bill Strauss's Fourth Turning, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that for me certainly has been an incredibly helpful framework in understanding that this is not something that's never happened before. In fact, it's happened almost regularly. You can almost set your clocks by it. Every 80 to 100 years we go through periods like this, and the nature of those periods is different, but the kind of broad picture of the backdrop to it is the same. And by the way, I totally forgot to mention Simon Mikhailovich, another good friend of mine who contributed the fifth essay. And each one of those, the one constant in all 5 essays was a reference to the Fourth Turning. So that, to me, I think is perhaps the place to possibly start, because I think so many people have read that book now and understand that it's trying to warn us about the way history repeats.
Is that long cycle, is that consistent with, let's say, Kondratiev wave? Is that like 80 to 100 year cycle? Is that consistent with that theory?
Yeah, it's and you and I know, Tim, we've looked at and talked and written about cycles for more years than we both care to remember, and you can find all kinds of overlapping cycles. But the Fourth Turning is it really is an irrelevancy to markets, and that's why I think it's been quite helpful. It's nothing really to do with markets. It's to do with the cycles of humanity, and it's to do with us as people making the same mistakes over and over again, and tending to make the ones that the generation that have just about died off made in their time, and now there's no one around to warn us of them or for us to remember. And here we are again. As we a few weeks ago, you like me no doubt saw the death of the Battle of Britain pilots at the age of 105. And I don't think it's any coincidence that the generation that lived through the Depression and the Roaring Twenties and into World War II are pretty much all gone now. My dad's 86. I've spent a lot of time with my dad lately, and he was born in 1939. So my dad, at 86, is too young to remember the war. He was evacuated to Burnley, of all places, when he was just a baby. So that knowledge and that understanding of the past and how we got there is gone in terms of everyday conversations with grandparents and great-grandparents. It's the onus is on the individuals to want to go and read about how these things happen in order not to repeat the mistakes, and people don't tend to want to put that kind of effort in, unfortunately.
So the history. I was going to say, talking about history repeating itself, lyrics to Waterloo, that the history book on the shelf is always repeating itself is a great line that I really love.
That may be our first ABBA reference in a geopolitical macro context.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Sure, there must be a reference to money, 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 or the winner takes it all somewhere, but that's a pretty specific one.
But what do you think people who haven't read The Fourth Turning could learn from it? What are the references that you think are relevant to what's coming?
It's this idea that there are archetypes, and this idea that in 20 to 25 year cycles, as generations mature and they watch their parents and they have these lessons about their parents, either struggles or triumphs handed down to them, it makes perfect sense to me that these cycles would perpetuate. And I think, given that Neil and Bill in 1997, I think it was either 94 or 97, they published this book, and they talked about how, based on their research, the next Fourth Turning, which is the period of crisis, would begin with a financial crisis around 2008, which is extraordinary. And of course, that happened. And these periods, these Fourth Turning periods, are characterized by crisis. This is the system finally reaching the end of its useful life, and perhaps more importantly, those being forced to live within it finally reaching the end of their tolerance for it, and developing a desire to just tear down all these infrastructures that have been built up after similar periods before. The last First Turning was when we got the World Bank and the IMF and the United Nations all created in a period of great hope after World War II. And we all know how people feel about the IMF and the World Bank and the World Health Organization and all these multinational institutions. People have had enough. And so I think by reading The Fourth Turning, you recognize that this isn't anything to do with Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Barack Obama or the World Bank or the IMF. It's got nothing to do with those institutions in isolation. It's got to do with the way the world evolves and the way trust gets dismantled in those institutions over a period of time. And things like Donald Trump, Trump is a symptom. He's not the cause of this. He's the man who was always going to be elected at this point in the cycle when people want to take a wrecking ball to the whole thing. And
that now looks so obvious, doesn't it, that he was going to be president, but a few people kind of saw it coming. Did you see it coming? Were you confident that he would be president?
I did, but both times, in fact. And this time, in fact, interesting story. I was in California the week before the election, and I was talking to a group of people out there and giving a presentation, and the guy that had asked me to speak said to me, "Look, would you mind if we kick off the day with you and I just on stage talking about the upcoming election and that kind of stuff?" He said, "I know it's a really fraught issue, particularly here in California, obviously, which is very pro-Democrat. But he said, you're English, and so it might be easy to have the conversation with you." And so I said, "Yeah, I'm absolutely happy to do that." I said, I won't cause you any trouble. I'll gauge the mood in the room, and I'll be circumspect with my comments depending on how the mood is." And so we had this conversation, and it was fascinating. And I went to great lengths to say to everybody that repeatedly through the hour or so we talked, I said, "Look, I'm English. I don't have a dog in this hunt. I cannot vote in your election. And believe me, we've got our own problems in the UK. We got, it's horses of a different colour, but it's just as problematic in the UK." And I went on to be as equal-handed as I could in laying out what I thought were the problems with both Trump and Harris. And at the end, the audience was actually pretty receptive to it. And I kept hammering these points over and over and over again. And we got to the end, and I said, "Look, I want to try an experiment here." I said, "You've just listened to me for an hour, bag both candidates, tell you the flaws I see in both candidates. You've heard me say over and over again that I cannot vote. I have no say in the outcome." I said, "But if you put a gun to my head, told me I had to vote in this election, I'd vote Trump without hesitation." I said, I think he's the better of two very poor options, and I think next week he's going to win in a big way and surprise a lot of people." And I got booed. I mean, literally, a lady stood up and booed me, and I said, "Look, did everybody feel that? Did everybody feel the mood in the room change?" I said, "Despite the fact that I can't vote, despite the fact that it means nothing, and despite the fact that you've just heard me say an awful lot of bad things about Donald Trump, an awful lot of bad things about Harris, and being very clear that I think he's the better of two very poor candidates," the whole atmosphere in the room changed. And that was where we were going into that election. It wasn't anything to do with the candidates. It was right and wrong, and my team's better than your team. And if you vote for the other team, we've got a problem. And that's the point you get to when the whole political infrastructure needs to be torn down and reinvented. And we've seen those periods before, and I suspect we're going to see another one coming up.
TheOnion.com, which I don't look at anymore because I think it's completely lost, but it used to be quite funny. They used to have some merch, and one of them was maybe they still do it. There was a T-shirt saying the sports team from my area is considerably better than the sports team from your area.
That's exactly it, right? That's it. It's Springfield and Shelbyville.
Have you read a book called 180 Degrees?
No, I haven't.
Have you heard of a book called 180 Degrees?
I have not.
So the companion piece I would make to The Fourth Turning is a book, and we had the author on, Paul, 2 years ago?
Must be, yeah, but
must be at least 2 years ago.
Gone,
yeah, again, time is working in very strange ways. But I caught this through a guy called Richard Vobes, who's a British podcaster, and as soon as I heard him being interviewed, I invited him onto this pod. But it's called the full name of the book. The full title is 180 Degrees: Unlearn the Lies You've Been Taught to Believe, and it's by ostensibly by someone called Fergus O'Connor Greenwood, which is a pseudonym because that's an Irish politician from the 19th century. Mm-hmm. But we had him on, so I have no idea who he is, but we know he exists because we've spoken to him. And he's on YouTube videos as well, so you can see what he looks like. But if I were to sum up 180 Degrees, it would be exactly the title of the book, which is Unlearn the Lies You've Been Taught to Believe. And this thing came out about 3 or 4 years ago now. And it's an absolute beast of a book. It's 850 pages. As soon as I heard about it, I managed to get procure a free PDF copy via archive.org, but it swiftly disappeared from archive.org. And then I bought a physical copy as well. And it basically suggests that we've been lied to pretty much forever about pretty much everything. And this goes back long. It predates 9/11. It predates COVID. It predates even the Second World War. It goes back at least as far as the origins of the First World War, if not further back than that. And have you read it, Paul?
I haven't, actually, I must admit.
But the reason I mention it with some reservation is because it's the most extraordinary book I've ever read in my life, and I've read quite a lot in my time. In part because I read English anyway, so that's a sort of whistle-stop tour through the great pantheon of English literature. But it's an incredible read, but it's also the most unsettling thing I've ever read, because it basically suggests we've been lied to pretty much forever about pretty much everything. So, for example, if you want a fairly neutral place to start, the one question we had, this is the one that we raised, I think, first when we had the author on a couple of years ago, and I asked Paul the same question. Do you think that Neil Armstrong landed on the moon in 1969?
Wait, and that's the neutral question to ask, is it?
That's a neutral one. Well, the reason I say it's neutral is because if you're a Brit or a non-American, you've got no real dog in the fight.
Well, you know,
it's not a matter of national pride.
No, right. It's so interesting you say this, because I remember very well a conversation I had in Hong Kong with a mate of mine, probably 15 years ago, I guess, and he floated to me this idea that the moon landing was staged, and it was the first time I'd ever even heard of that as a conspiracy theory. I mean, literally, how it passed me by, I don't know. And I kind of laughed, and I said, yeah, right, obviously. And he's like, no, seriously. It was completely staged. And I'm like, come on, dude, seriously. I mean, I've seen Capricorn 1, but I didn't realize that this was actually based on a real conspiracy theory. And since then, I've, in the immediate aftermath of that conversation, I went down the rabbit hole, as a lot of people have, and I ended up with the very simplistic justification, I realize, that 3 people can't keep a secret. And so there's just no way.
Kind of 2 of them are dead.
Well, kind of 2 of them are dead. Yes, yeah, no, exactly right. But hundreds. I can't say that I believe it was staged, but there's enough there for me to say I can't categorically say that all of that is nonsense.
To be fair, Fergus, he did say that it was, because Tim asked me the same question with Fergus on the show, and I said, look, I didn't think it was staged, but I wasn't sure, and that was my answer. And Fergus said, he said, now that wasn't fair that you asked the question in that way, Tim, because it was not a question of whether they went, it's when they went. It's like, did they go at the time they showed it, or did they go at a different time?
Oh, I see. Okay.
Do you see what I mean? Which
to the point about keeping a secret, in the book, Fergus also mentions that his rebuttal is, well, to be fair, the Americans also had a thing called the Manhattan Project that employed well over 100,000 people, and they kept that a secret from everybody except the Russians who got leaked the information about the bomb anyway. But it is possible for huge projects to be kept secret for quite a while.
Well,
I'm not sure that necessarily answers the question or not.
Yeah, but with that one, I think it's different, because that was, like let's call it classified information,
national security.
But the results of it were then demonstrated to the public, the real results of this project. So it wasn't like once Fat Man and Little Boy got dropped, everybody had to still stay quiet, and you could never tell anyone about it, and you couldn't tell your neighbours. So I feel that's slightly different.
But if we bring it slightly more up to date, then the next sort of thing argued, and there are multiple chapters, so it's not just limited to the most well-known conspiracy theories. The next one is the jet fuel can't melt steel beams theory.
Well,
or to put it another way, how many towers fell on 9/11? And most people would say 2, even though the answer is 3, and one of them wasn't even hit by a plane.
Yeah. Look, and there was I don't know if it's still there, but I remember seeing, because I was in New York on 9/11, so that was something that was very real to me. And And I saw a documentary on YouTube called Loose Change 2. I have no idea if it's still up there. I don't know if you've seen it or not. But that was my first exposure to all the conspiracy theories about 9/11. And again, having been there and walked through that smoke to get to Grand Central and try and get off of Manhattan after it all, because I experienced it, it's so real in my head that it's very difficult for me to not just see it as the films portrayed it, because I lived it. But I certainly see a lot of these things. I mean, the third building that fell, again, is a mystery that I cannot explain, and the lack of coverage that it gets definitely suggests to me that there are reasons why that's being kept quiet. But again,
or the fact that it was news of its collapse was reported
by the BBC,
30 minutes before it happened.
Exactly. So there are all. But I think as we move through the world today, there are so many vectors upon which information comes at you now that if you have a mind to, you can pretty much find a conspiracy theory in just about anything. And not only does it not have to be bulletproof in terms of its credibility, it can spread incredibly quickly, and the way these things spread and the speed with which they spread and grow is extraordinary to me. So I look, maybe that's the whole point, because once we're off guard and we don't know what's real and we don't know what's fake, that's just as good as convincing us everything's real, I suppose.
Sure. I mean, there's so much to sort of to dive into, but the way I'd sum it up is that for all of us on the pod today, I suggest 2008 was a sort of visceral experience, and for me it was like, well, that was a sort of a seminal event in my not just career but my life, and it showed just how corrupt sort of big finance is. But I naively thought at the time that Wall Street was somehow some independent, isolated occurrence. And the years subsequent to 2008 have shown, I think in spades, unfortunately, big everything is just as bad. Big pharma, big food, big ag, big media, big tech. The idea that finance was somehow in a world of its own in terms of corruption. Unfortunately, what seems to have happened since is that we've had multiple reasons to conclude that actually the whole system is, at the level of large businesses, is just rotten.
Yeah, I struggle to pick any of that apart, Tim, to be honest with you. I mean, like you, when 2008 came around, I've been inside the belly of the beast for 25 odd years, and on an individual level, I had seen the kind of people that would, scheme and do anything Machiavellian to make money or to increase their bonuses. I'd seen all that up close, so I knew that there were people in finance that would stop at nothing to enrich themselves and really had zero scruples. But I think 2008 demonstrated beyond any shadow of a doubt to anyone that was inside that was very much true on an institutional level as well. And I think that the great miss from 2008 was a chance to reset the system and for people to go to jail and for some of these behaviors to be held up to a spotlight. And I place the blame firmly in Obama's court with that one, because he came in with an extraordinary mandate and the ability in a moment in time to say, okay, Americans, this is going to be tough, but we have to fix this. And he didn't. He declined that opportunity, and I suspect strongly that was the point where the money, in terms of vested interests, came out and overtly captured politics and said, listen, that we can make this good for everybody. Here's how it's going to go down. And I think since then we've just seen that train keep moving further and further away from the station and further away from the man in the street, and corporate interests and big money has now completely captured business. It's captured politics, and this is one of those things that will ultimately be torn down in the process we're going through. It's the one piece of it I can't see just yet how it gets torn down, particularly when I look at someone like Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, inserting himself into the political process in the way that he has. And you can see right there, that's the nexus, right? That's the nexus of fascism, of government and corporatism. I mean that in the definition of the word.
Textbook way.
I don't want people jumping on saying that Elon Musk isn't a fascist. That's not the point I'm making. But if you want a demonstration of business capturing politics, there it is in the Oval Office, standing next to the Resolute desk.
Aren't there some times when we look at the politicians and say, wouldn't it be great if they had some form of business nous, and then just on the other side of someone like Elon Musk taking control and putting to play devil's advocate to what you've just said there, he given how successful he has been in his other business and how smart he is, whether people believe he is or not, isn't that something that some of the qualities that we'd want in our leaders, as opposed to just being career politicians and just not answering questions and having no real idea how to run a business, at all? At least we know Elon Musk has had to deal with the government and the government bureaucracy, for example, with regards to the employment laws for the SpaceX part of his business, which says that he's not allowed to employ immigrants because of the security risks. But then at the same time, he's got DEI policies and certain policies that he has to follow because you need to have a range of people working for your company. So you've got government bureaucracy that's telling you to literally break your own rules and you cannot win. And so now he's in government, sort of swinging the bat a little bit against some of that stuff. And I take a peripheral view to it because I don't like politicians full stop, and I'm more interested in the markets. But I think it's an interesting exercise to see what he's doing and how people are railing against it for different reasons. But on one side of it, I like the fact that he's a businessman and he's in government doing something different.
Oh boy! Do you want to put? Have you got any way to insert a sound effect of me rolling my sleeves up here?
No,
well, it's not live, so we can clearly superimpose sleeves being rolled.
I'd love it. Go.
Maybe a motorbike revving up.
Look. Anyone listening to this who's even remotely familiar with my work over the years will have an understanding of my views on Musk in particular. But let me start, Paul, with addressing the broader idea, which I think you're absolutely correct. This idea that academics and politicians are better positioned to run countries than businessmen is absurd, and it always has been. But in the past, we have been blessed with leaders who may not necessarily be as competent as the heads of industry in running something like
I
countries.
particularly rate Angela Rayner in this regard.
Okay, Tim. Well, let's sidebar that for the moment. But in the past, you have at least been able to see leadership, and that's important to have at the head of a country. And I will add on to leadership the word statesman. We have seen statesmen and women who are impressive orators, impressive on the world stage, and will take tough decisions and correct things that need correcting and do unpopular things for the greater good. I think the three of us have been around long enough, or grey enough of hair and long enough of tooth to have been around and seen competent, impressive business leaders in our careers. I just don't see how that applies to Elon Musk. I just don't. And I think one of the great things that the way the world has gone with media and the tie-ins between media and corporates and the clickbait society and the fact that people will say anything about anyone if they're going to get clicks, and the revenue model of advertising. All those things have combined to Tim, you'll probably remember Trumpton, when the thing would turn around and the character would come up through the top hat or the roundabout, whatever it was.
I remember Trumpton.
Yeah. It would always be a different character every week as the music box played, and all these things.
Now I think about it, Trumpton. It was predictive programming.
I can't remember.
It was preparing us.
Yeah, maybe it was. But this time the music's played, the music box is open, and here's Elon Musk, and here's a guy who, if you've watched Doge, and you are able to strip away political bias, which is very difficult. I understand that. You've got Republicans saying, yeah, here's our guy. He's taking a chainsaw to big government. He's ripping it up. Never mind what he's doing, but he's doing what needed to be done, which is tearing down the government and finding all the fraud and doing all this stuff. And on the left, you've got this guy saying he's an unappointed official. He's in there. He's taking money away from starving kids, and he's deporting this. He's deporting that. And I get all that. And just about everybody in America is on one of those camps because the country is so divided. In the middle, I think people like us who are removed from it and are watching it without a political dog in the hunt, we see someone who, as he has done with his businesses, is doing things completely by the seat of his pants, is taking a chainsaw to try and perform brain surgery, and is creating the kind of problems that require patience and precision to try and solve. And he's doing it for headlines. He's doing it to try and justify the $2 trillion number that he said would be easy to solve, and obviously made great headlines. That's now come down to $1 trillion. And at the time of $2 trillion, again, Republicans cheering yay, Democrats cheering, you can't cut $2 trillion out the state, all these poor people are going to die. And those among us who've observed Elon Musk for the last 10, 15 years going, that's a number he's pulled straight out of his arse, and he has no idea how he's going to do it, and there's no chance he's going to get there. And here we are, 120 odd days later. The number's not talked about anymore. It's been cut to $1 trillion. He's on his way out the door shortly, having created turmoil. And who knows what the cleanup job's going to be like. Now, to be perfectly clear, I think what he was charged with doing, which is, isolating fraud and waste in the US government, is long overdue. And it should be done, and it needs to be done. And I think when they go in there, they will find an extraordinary amount of waste, fraud, and abuse. Absolutely. But Musk has gotten the job for what reason? Not because he's the most competent, not because he's the most man likely to do it in the most effective way, but because he's visible and he creates headlines, and he donated a ton of money to Trump's campaign, and he brings with him eyeballs, and he brings with him press, and it's all the wrong reasons to put the wrong guy in the right job. And that's not leadership. That is, okay, what's most important to us? It's the public's view of what we're doing. It's not what we're doing. And that's the society we've built up. A great friend of mine told me a story. He was in Singapore, sitting in the bar at the top of the Marina Bay, not the Marina Bay Sands, the Fullerton Bay Hotel, overlooking the Marina Bay Sands, and waiting to meet someone. He's sitting there with a beer quietly, and on the table next to him were these two 20-somethings, and they were bitching and moaning about their boss and their job, and it was just bitch. They were just miserable, the pair of them. And he listened to this for about 10 minutes, and then the waiter walks over, puts down 2 fancy cocktails with umbrellas and fruit and all kinds of things, at which point they both get their phones out, take the obligatory Instagram snaps, all smiles and peace signs, and you know when they're putting them up, living my best life. They put the phones away, back to bitching about Steve in accounts. And that's such a microcosm of the world we live in. And I think, sadly, that explains a lot of politics these days. It's okay, we know that the cameras are on us. We know social media is going to amplify this. What is the message we want amplified? And the message was, Elon Musk, he's our guy. He's going to go in. He's going to shake things up. I suspect he is going to have created an unholy mess that is going to take a long, long time to clear up. But again, it's an important job to do. I just wish they'd chosen someone who is competent to do it, and not someone who is the poster boy for move fast and break things.
But before
you mentioned headlines. To what extent do you think that, I mean, with or without Musk, but I think specifically with Musk, given his ownership of Twitter or X, the media landscape has just been completely shattered over the last few years. That basically legacy media is really dying on its feet now.
Yeah, and I mean, it comes back to that 180-degree book, Tim. I mean, maybe that's how that story ends, because there are extraordinary people out there producing independent content. They're much harder to find. But somewhere like Substack, you can read all kinds of interesting people who are thoughtful and as unbiased as anyone can be, because we all have our personal biases. They just don't have the platform that the legacy media companies have. But the more and more that those get debunked and the more and more they lose credibility and respect, the more people are going to go to independent news sources. And there will be, sadly, I'm sure, a pretty small window before people start rolling up, quote unquote, independent commentators into, hey, we've got this great new idea for a new platform on Substack, and we're going to aggregate all the best Substack writers, and we're going to bring them together, and we're going to present you blah, 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 blah. And we're very susceptible to that because we want things to be easy. And the whole history of the progress of mankind is basically a tribute to laziness. We've wanted to do less for more. That's why we've invented just about everything. And so if you serve people up something that you tell them is going to save them time but give them great benefits, i.e. you don't have to search around Substack for all these really smart people. We'll tell you who's smart and independent, and we'll present them all to you.
But that creates the whole problem all over again.
But there's a window.
It's old wine in new
bottles. There's a window where if you're prepared to do the work and you're prepared to go and find these people and read enough and think critically and be able to say, actually, I don't know about this. I'm not sure about this guy. There's a window where you can have access to some extraordinary information. It'll close, I'm sure, in the way I just described. But again, look, it comes down to us taking responsibility for what we want. Do you want unbiased information? Well, you need to go and find it. It used to be served to you at 6 p.m. on a weekday night and 10 p.m. on a weekday night. That's not the case anymore.
They have to go out and forage.
Yeah, you've got to go and find it. You've got
it.
to be prepared to go and find it. And that's a bridge too far for people who've grown up in a world where they've been accustomed to having everything delivered to them, and to the point of your man Fergus, told that this is reliable.
Wasn't the media always biased? There's always a bias between newspapers. There's always going to be a bias on what was the news, what they show you, what they don't, what's headline news, what's buried elsewhere. And isn't the problem with media today that there's just this massive fragmentation where because of X, because of YouTube, because of Substack, because of Facebook, because of Instagram, there is so much competition for our attention. We know the days of when you had 4 channels on the TV and that was it. And you know, it was actually a people who had a VHS recorder who could record something and watch it later or get a video. And now it's how many different video channels there are, or streaming channels. It's just there. It's a kind of an overload. And another problem you have is the tech companies now take news media and they package it and sell it in a way that they're controlling the delivery of that media. So you get News Plus from Apple, which has got an aggregation of other newspapers' stories that you then have to pay Apple for, but Apple pays the news story companies for because they're gatekeeping the access to your iPhone. So there's so many elements of competition that have come together that have fragmented the media. And I think it comes back to what Tim was saying about how certain conspiracy, certain news, the way it flows in the markets, the way opinions can change by very small comments that then get amplified, and the truth kind of gets some grayed out somewhere in the middle, and it's so hard to find out what's really going on. But it's a kind of a technology problem, or that's how I see it.
Well, I think that's really interesting, Paul, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. But I think one of the big shifts, I think, yes, you're right. Your initial premise there that media is always biased is true. I mean, I think that's clearly the case. But I think the big shift that's happened over the last 25 years, maybe slowly, maybe even slower, over 30 years, is that we used to get news, and now we get opinion. Everything's opinion. I mean, everything is opinion. Try and find news in a newspaper now. It's very, very difficult. And that is, I think, a reflection of this kind of slide into narcissism as a society that we've taken, that social media has amplified. And what's happened is the newspapers and the TV broadcasts have created these personalities. And so, you'll have people say, oh yeah, I get my news from Tucker Carlson, or I get my news from, The View or Rachel Maddow, or someone's got
Dave Rubin.
Yeah, right. People have the person they get their news from, and media and TV and newspapers.
But that was always the case, because in the 60s,
I agree, Tim. But I think there was alongside the Walter Cronkite was the aberration, because he was on his one show, right? And he wasn't Walter Cronkite outside that. Walter Cronkite was the trusted face to bring you the news. Nowadays, every single anchor has a personality created around them to draw people to them and their personality. And I mean, you can see it in something like the Daily Telegraph, right? Everything's an opinion, whether it's Ambrose or Jeremy Warner or Su Ping Chan or Liam Halligan, or it's always the person that people start creating the stuff around. And that goes doubly for TV, where it's Emily Maitlis, or it's whoever's doing Question Time now, or Newsnight, or it's everywhere, and everything is built around making people the stars. So by doing that, everything becomes opinion, and it doesn't then matter what that person says. Your opinion is that I like this person, he's my guy, and so I'm going to defend anything he says, I'm going to believe anything he says. And your guy over there, I don't believe anything they says, because my guy says they talk rubbish, so I'm not going to believe anything that comes out of their mouth. And hey presto, there you go.
I mean, I'd refine Paul's point to the extent that the media's always been biased, but the extreme bias has only recently become that much more transparent.
I think that's fair.
So, for example, I mean, again, it's going back to the sort of 180 degrees thing, but the reason that book is so unsettling is because it basically, as the name implies, as the title implies, it turns everything you think you thought you knew about upside down. And if you move, so the BBC of, let's say, my parents' generation was a properly trusted medium. It was a properly trusted platform, especially during the war. So people treated that like gospel. And the rot for me set in around 2016, if not earlier, when the coverage of Brexit was so slanted that it became unwatchable for me. So I'd say that you can extrapolate from 2016, from the Brexit vote through to the first Trump administration to where we are now. And with that, and it's partly something that sort of runs through 180 degrees very consistently, is it's a very sort of spiritually inclined book. And I think to pick up that baton and run with it, we are living through a time of revelation, that we are all being exposed to astonishing truths that we never thought we knew.
Yeah, I think that's...
And in other words, we're seeing what the world's like, and we don't like.
Yeah, no, and I think that was bound to happen. I mean, look, go back to the two Gulf Wars, right? There's the contrast there. The first Gulf War was a very, very easy sell. Saddam Hussein went across the border into Kuwait. Very, very simple. The coverage of that, we all remember the CNN guys, Bernard, I can't remember his surname now, but under the table as the bombs are going off in Kuwait City. The second Gulf War, very, very different. You had to convince the public. You had to convince people that there was a reason for going into Iraq. And obviously what we've learned since then has completely debunked all that. And yet there's been no consequences for it. There's been no backlash. And I think it's those kind of things that build up over time, because ultimately the average human being has this innate sense of justice, of right and wrong, of good and bad. And I think the idea of there being consequences for bad action is absolutely part of the human condition. It's how we're raised in the West. That's just the way it is. And I think a big part of the fragmentation we've seen on a societal basis is this gradual building belief that there are no consequences anymore. Nothing bad happens to people who do bad things. And without that, without there being a consequence for doing something immoral or against someone else, you take that away and you remove this foundational belief in how society is supposed to work. And so...
Well, it's worse than that. There's no consequences for the elites,
right.
But if
Great
you make
point.
an off-colour or offhand remark about your child's school, then 6 coppers are going to come around you.
Absolutely right, Tim. Absolutely right. But of course, the elite stuff is played out in public, and absent social media, we'd never have heard about those 6 policemen turning up at that woman's house. And even now, the vast majority of the British population still have not heard about that story because it's not going to get any amplification in the mainstream media. So
we should just mention what that was about for people.
Yeah, well, you guys are in the UK, so you can do it better than I can from over here.
Yeah. Tim?
So my understanding of the case is that a parent simply made a criticism of their child's school. I think it's Hertfordshire. And fairly soon afterwards, I think it was half a dozen police turned up at the house to basically...
Well, they arrested her. They actually arrested her, I believe.
They arrested it was both parents, and it was they made the comments in a semi-private WhatsApp group. I mean, I say semi-private because it was with other parents, so clearly it wasn't completely private, but it was with other parents, and they'd criticised the school over an appointment of some kind, I believe it was, which they'd kind of questioned why a deputy just went straight into a position at the school without it being externally put up for the position, and obviously we won't know the full details of what happened or what was said, but it appeared to be whatever was said in those WhatsApp groups, or however big the criticisms were, or however fruity the language might have been. And I've not seen the transcripts, so I don't know exactly what was said. It took multiple police officers to arrest both of those parents for those comments in that WhatsApp group. And I think a lot of people would be watching that and thinking, wouldn't it be great if they could turn up like that when somebody's house has been burgled, or car's been burgled, or there's been some form of robbery in a shop or something like that. I mean, it just boggles the mind that this sort of thing can happen, and it could also be just over a Facebook post, and maybe it's happening more often than we're seeing, and it just gets attenuated or doesn't get the sort of publicity. But absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I mean, and there are so many of these stories, and they're not confined to the UK. If you're of a mind to look for them, or even if you're not, you will get served them in social media. They're happening everywhere. I mean, Australia is a great example post-COVID. Some of the stories in Australia along a similar tangent are extraordinary. Particularly with Australia's response to COVID. Some of the things that happened down there in terms of people getting arrested for sitting on a beach without anyone within a mile of them having a quiet cup of coffee and physically being handcuffed and taken off to prison. I mean, it's extraordinary. But this is all, as I see it, part of this gradual slide into the end of the fourth turning, where people have just said, I've had enough of this. I've had enough of these institutions. And whether these institutions are the World Bank, the IMF, the UN, or they are local government, local police, whatever it may be, this all needs to be torn down and built again from a place of a new social contract where we understand the rules, and more importantly, we understand that there are consequences, and this is what they are, and they're reasonable and proportionate. And without that, this slide is going to continue, and this is the main reason why, from my reading of Neil's work and my study of other cycles, the fear of this ending in violence is very, very real. And what that violence looks like, whether it's neighbour on neighbour or, as we're seeing in Europe, country upon country, it doesn't really matter, because it's just this you reach this point where the only resolution seems to be violence. And I do worry, as someone with kids and grandkids, I worry about that a great deal.
What career advice would you be giving your kids and grandkids
Boy, oh
now?
boy, that's...
Assuming that they're about to enter the workforce.
Tim, it's such a great question, and I'm fortunate in that I've got 2 kids in the workforce and 2 grandkids who are, a decade plus away from entering the workforce. So I've got a bit of a sweet spot where I don't have to give them any advice right now. But look, I think ultimately, no matter what transpires from here, I think history suggests that we will ultimately go back to the things that have always mattered, and that is civility, and that is integrity and authenticity, and these words that have become almost discarded in modern society. Authenticity is actually the worst thing for you. Everyone's living their lives on Instagram, and nobody wants to show their authentic life. They all want to show this life that they imagine other people would be envious of. And ultimately, morals and authenticity and the things that you can genuinely build societies upon will have to be put in place when society gets reimagined and ultimately rebuilt. And Tim, you and I have talked about this in the past. We've written about it in the past. We've had conversations about it in the past. The role that money plays and the corruption of money plays in this cannot be overstated. And people struggle to understand the role that the debasement and the debauchery of money takes in this, but is absolutely foundational and crucial to understand that when we get to these points in history where money has been completely debauched, you lose the morals that money provides as an underpinning to society. If money is the exchange for your labours, and money is the means in which you save your excess production for future date and for future use, and you can no longer rely on that, it's been corrupted and debased and debauched, well, guess what happens after that? You find yourself having to behave in a different way. And so what we're seeing now, I think, is the beginning of the end of that period. We're seeing all these people rushing to buy gold. And
well,
recently Bitcoin. But again, I'm no fan of Bitcoin. I understand the premise, and I'm not dumping on it. But let's talk about that in the sense of Bitcoin and gold. Again, gold is going back to this idea that to create a gold bar, there is physical labor involved. You dig a hole in the ground, you pull this stuff up, you refine it. There is labor. And if we go into what Bitcoin is again an extension of this idea that progress is getting richer by doing less. And so it works for a period of time. And it's a great narrative, and we've watched the narrative around Bitcoin shift and morph and change and adapt and take on new aspects in a bid to maintain interest in it. But realistically speaking, how much labor has gone into creating a Bitcoin? I mean, people's gone out and spent a load of money on computer chips, and they've had to sit there while the computer does the work for them. But again, if we're going to go back to something real and authentic that has integrity, and as I'm saying these words, I can hear the Bitcoiners' fingers already on their keyboards, and I totally understand that. But there is no comparison between Bitcoin and gold to me. They're two completely different things, and I think that if I'm right about the sheer size of this cycle that we are watching come to an end, it dwarfs Bitcoin, and it takes us back. It takes us back to not the analog age, but it takes us back to an analog asset underpinning everything, and that can and only will be gold. And of course I could be wrong about this. Of course I could.
How hopeful are you that central banks may not survive this fourth turning moment? Because I would say they don't deserve to. They're very poorly understood. But if people really understood the nature of them, then I think it was Henry Ford said, if people understood the nature of banking, there'd be a revolution
and I think
tomorrow.
He's right, and I think you're right. I think central banks should not survive this. But I suspect if they don't, they will be the last institutions to crumble.
Because that's really where the last of the power sits, the last bit to fall. So how hopeful are you that CBDCs will catastrophically fail when they are guaranteed to be introduced? Because already the Europeans feel like they want to get their paws on the experiment.
They've been talking about it for a while. I don't know, Tim, to be honest. I haven't spent enough time thinking about it. I think some of these questions can't be answered, by the way.
But
my point is, I feel like they're inevitable. But I feel like right now I've got things I need to understand more than the time I would need to devote to those. I don't see them happening imminently. I understand what they are very, very useful for in terms of their issuers. I understand the constraints they place upon those who are forced to use them very, very well. I think that's going to be a bit of a stretch from here. But I don't rule it out. I just don't know how quickly they'll get that through. And what I'm...
So I suppose for me, it's a philosophical thing, which is you can either believe in free markets or you can believe in CBDC, but you don't get to have both.
I completely agree.
So you have to choose. And so I think the polarization thing, the political polarization thing is, the whole dialogue is simplistic because people talk about left and right, but those terms are now meaningless. For me, the whole thing is much more existentially simplistic, which is you either believe in big government or you believe in the individual. And again, you don't get both.
You can't have both, can you? By definition, yeah.
So you have to choose.
My worry is that you don't get to choose. You don't get to choose without revolution, because the government are not going to choose the individual, and the individual is going to be forced to choose the government unless they reach the point like the Americans did in 1776, where they say no mass. This is why when we talk about these things, when we talk about parallels to the American Revolution, or we talk about the possible secession of Texas or California, or all these ideas that for the last 50 years, you could have brought those up and ascribed literally a 0% possibility of any of them happening. And it's not often you can do that, but you could have done that for most of our lifetimes. And the big change here is you absolutely cannot ascribe a 0% possibility to any of those things happening. And that, the
Overton windows become infinitely wide.
Right. It's more almost like the sort of Overton bifold doors now. But the very fact, if the possibility of those things goes from 0 to 1%, that is a massive change, and it forces all of us to think about the world very, very differently indeed, because that 1% of things like that happening has the potential, huge.
The ramifications are so huge,
and yet people they're either not willing to entertain those as potential outcomes, or they haven't thought through, but it's such a small chance of happening, I'm not going to worry about it. And I think those are dangerous assumptions to make. Even if you do nothing, and I've banged on about this for quite some time now, even if you do nothing about it, you owe it to yourself and your kids and your future to at least take the time to think it through and think about how it might affect you. And then you can go, I can see what might happen, but I think there's 0 chance. Fine. If that's your decision, but at least you've done the work. But to say, I'm not even going to bother to think about that, it's such a crazy idea, I think that's a very, very dangerous attitude to take.
So on our previous pod, you were talking about gold, and you were talking about gold miners, and your philosophy, which is basic market sort of outlook, which is you're a value investor, and you're saying that there's, even though you look at value, doesn't necessarily mean that gold miners will go up at all times, but obviously they have done up till now, and gold's performed extremely well. what's your outlook now? Is this a time to be selling gold now that your vision of gold is coming to fruition, or are we just getting going? And what's your view on the gold miners to go with it?
This is where I always infuriate people, because I won't give you a straight answer, but I'll be very deliberate about why, and it comes down to motivation, because when people say to me, is this the point in time where you might want to sell gold? My answer is it depends. If you bought gold because you thought the price could go through $3,000, then I can make a very good case for why you should sell gold now. If you bought gold because you were worried about the debasement of your purchasing power, then the price of gold is a complete irrelevancy. Is gold maintaining your purchasing power? Well, it's obviously doing more than that right now. So if you want to be precise, you could maybe trim some of your gold to maintain your purchasing power. But that to me is making a simple thing very, very complicated. I bought gold in 2003 because I looked at what happened after the dot-com bubble. I looked at the response of central banks, and it became obvious to me that my problem for the next 20 years of my life at that point, and obviously that's now been extended, the problem I was going to have to solve for was the debasement of currency and the loss of my purchasing power. It's not about whether markets go up. It's not about whether I can invest properly. Any dollar, any pound, euro, yen that I have in my possession, the problem I have to solve for is how do I make sure that I maintain the purchasing power of that unit of currency? And gold, after I did a ton of reading, and I'd never thought about gold before this, I paid attention to the gold price, but only because that's what everybody in markets did, and you kind of had an understanding that, if gold price goes up, it means this after a set of numbers. It wasn't any great meditation upon what gold was for, its place in the financial system on my part. But I came to understand that through an awful lot of reading, and it became clear to me that owning gold was going to protect my purchasing power. So that's what I've done ever since. I've just continually bought gold, or I should say accumulated gold, because I don't think of it as buying gold. I think of it as just exchanging one unit of currency for money. And over that time, I've watched the price go up and I've watched the price go down, and I've never sold an ounce of gold that I bought. And people will say, well, what's the point of buying something if you're never going to sell it? And that's purely a mindset thing, because in my head, I very much planned at some point in time I'm never going to sell my gold, but I'm going to exchange it for something that I want to own more. And yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And it will preserve their purchasing power. But I think, I put a presentation together last year, and in that I was trying to find a way to explain to people how to think about this idea of gold, where the price is irrelevant. Because everybody, when you talk about gold, and I could spend an hour giving a presentation saying, it's not about the price. And I go, right, any questions? The first hand always goes up, and it's always, so do you think gold will get through 2000 this year? I mean, and I get it. Look, I get it. I get it. I absolutely understand why, but that's the mindset. And so I put these charts together, and I went through my own personal journey. I bought my first gold in 2003. And I paid $333 for an ounce of gold, and I bought that one gold coin for cash because I wanted to see how easy it was, and I was trying to figure out how to buy gold. And I'll never forget handing over $333 in cash and being handed something that felt like money. There was a weight to it, and it's like, wow, this is kind of cool.
Heavy.
So I did my own journey, and people can say, oh, you're cherry picking. That's fine, but I think a 22-year window. Well, no, because
why would they say,
because I got lucky, and the performance I've seen has been extraordinary, right? Because I did buy it in 2003, but I think 22 years is a decent enough time frame, and you could find points in that time where if you bought it, you would have performed less well or whatever. But this is my journey, and when I bought that gold coin, the median US house price was $200,000. It was 600 ounces of gold, basically. And in July of last year, when I put this presentation together, gold at that point was $2,400 an ounce. And the median US house price, which as a lot of people tell you, is now unaffordable to the median American, was $417,000. So it more than doubled the price of the median household, and people's wages hadn't kept up. And so that house price was twice the price. But if I was going to exchange my gold for that median house in the US, I'd have had to exchange 173 ounces. So the price of the house, in terms of what I had to exchange for it, was 71% less. And so it's this idea of the price of gold being completely irrelevant. And you see, the price is completely irrelevant. I would have had to give away 71% less of my gold. I could have bought 3 median house prices with the same amount of gold, even though the price had become unattainable to most Americans. So, you can do the same calculation in units of the Dow if you don't want to buy a house. If you had $200,000 back then, if you put that house money, the $200,000 in cash, and you looked at how many units of the Dow Jones you could buy, flip it around today, and you can buy 32% less units of the Dow Jones. It doesn't matter what your measuring stick is. It's this idea that forget the price, is what can I use that gold for if it's preserving my purchasing power?
I mean, I think we're all channeling, or certainly Grant and I would be channeling Tony Deedon here again.
Absolutely.
In the extent is, the critical question is why did you buy it in the first place? And the reason that, say, we buy gold both personally and I talk about my own business for clients is, I'd say it's primarily driven by concerns about the debt market. That's always been the prime mover for us, which is what happens when a disorderly, gigantic debt pyramid collapses. Well, the answer is you don't want to hold fiat currency, full stop. So anything that's real is probably superior to that. So the question for us is not at what dollar price do you sell. It's under what circumstances do you look to reconsider whether you're holding it or not. And for us, the answer is, well, when the debt problem's been resolved, and we're so much further down the line on that one that so for me, the answer is we're nowhere near an environment where it would be worth taking profits, because what are you going to do with the proceeds?
You know what the really interesting thing is? If I said now in this conversation that I could see gold going to $25,000 an ounce quite easily, I guarantee you this podcast will get shared, and that people say Grant Williams thinks gold's going to $25,000 an ounce, right? This fixation with the price is both extraordinary but understandable at the same time, because we've not been used to thinking about gold at the center of the financial system. It's been something that you buy with your fiat currency. Correct. And that's long enough that there's very few people who were actually thinking about gold's place in their portfolios back then. You'd have to be 80 odd, I guess, to have lived in that and been of an age where you had money and you had savings and you had to think about protecting them. So most people don't think about it. Gold is something you buy with money, whereas the reality is gold is the anchor of the entire financial system, and everything else floats around that. It's the only constant we have. Money is something you spend, and gold is something you save in. Yeah, that's right. And so my favorite is the I forget who it was now, but it was the Wall Street guy that said gold is a 4,000-year-old bubble. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that'll do me. Yeah, that's beautiful. I don't know who said that either, but that's great.
Today, the markets are having a bit of a down day, to say the least. Is that something that you expected to happen? And how do you think things are going to pan out from here?
Well, look, we don't know. And the one thing I think it's safe to say is that what we are going to see is more volatility, and we're seeing that. And I fully expect markets to bounce back today. They'll open on their lows and they'll probably creep higher, because that's the way of the world. And the one thing that Trump and his team bring is volatility, because they're again in the form of Musk, they're seemingly making decisions without necessarily taking an awful lot of time to think them through. I mean, you only have to look at. Well, you cited earlier the expression "move fast and break things," and that is from a book called, as I understand it, is a book called Chaos Monkeys. Right, exactly, and that was the kind of underpinnings of Silicon Valley. that was championed. Elizabeth Holmes. This was. We move fast and break things. Aren't we great? Because eventually we get it right and everything's great and we progress, and that's fine up to a point. And
but it's not necessarily how the world's largest economy and government should be managed.
It's a great idea if you're trying to build a technology company. Fine. Maybe not so good if you're trying to build a technology company when there's a proper cost of capital, but that's an argument for another day. So I think Trump has shown that he will make these pronouncements and he will then backtrack and he'll bring people to the table. And so far, it's worked. And at some point, we saw what happened with the initial threats to Canada and Mexico. They both backed off pretty quickly, and everybody kind of went, "Oh, wow, look, see what it works." And the one thing I think anybody, Trump fan or not, could probably agree on is that at some point, someone like him that pushes the envelope is going to step over the edge and push it too far. Is this that point? I don't know. But what I see is he is creating reasons for an awful lot of other countries to change their behavior. And any change in behavior by other countries that incentivizes them to look for ways to operate without America, or with America having a reduced role in a system that is built around the US dollar, is potentially an enormous problem for the United States, because the dollar is its greatest advantage and its biggest weakness. And there's been so much ink spilt and podcast air sucked up by people talking about the dollar as the reserve currency and the BRICS and all this stuff. And we've been talking about it for a long, long time. And people can pull out the statistics they want to show you why the dollar is still as powerful as ever. And they can pull out data that will suggest that it's at the fringes, it's starting to weaken. So let's put the data aside for 1 second, and let's talk about incentives, because the great Charlie Munger famously said, "Show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcomes." And that is, as pithy as that is, it's one of the most useful little aphorisms that I've ever come across in all my years in finance, because it's 100% true in every single situation. And so having something like that to use as a benchmark is a really useful tool. And the US is incentivizing other countries to find ways to go around them. And if those are the incentives, the outcome is going to be that these countries find ways to go around the US. And with so much dollar debt in the world, persuading your trading partners to use less of it when you've got deficits the size of the United States and funding requirements like they have is potentially absolutely catastrophic. And many times throughout history, we've seen reserve currency domination, periods of domination end because of political missteps, because of mistakes. I mean, look at the Suez Crisis, Tim. I've probably read enough and understand that. That was how the UK threw things away, basically. And these things can have real-world ramifications. And if anybody can explain to me why and how the US freezing Russia's assets post the Ukraine invasion, there's central bank assets, not individual oligarchs I'm talking about here. If anyone can explain to me why that wasn't a catastrophic policy mistake, I'm all ears, because I'd love to hear a justification of why it was a 3D chess move. I just haven't heard one yet. Because that single act alone, I wrote about this at the time. I wrote a piece called "The End of the Financial World as We Know It," highlighting the fact that move is possibly the biggest financial decisions that's been made since August 1971. Because you've now...
For context, sorry to interrupt, Grant, so for context for people who aren't familiar with it, a friend of mine pointed out at the time that even at and I cite this constantly in conversations with clients and colleagues, even at the height of the Second World War, the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, the so-called central bank for central banks, never dared to touch Germany's foreign reserves. Right. And yet, weeks into the Ukraine conflict, effectively the US basically freezes Russia. And you think, well, as you've just yourself said, if you're running a $30 trillion if you have $30-odd trillion of debt that needs to be financed, it's probably not the wisest move to make all unaligned countries second guess whether they want to own a penny of your debt anymore.
Well, see, Tim, I take it a step further than that, because to me, what you've actually done by doing that is, look, every single country in the world holds dollars in their reserve because it's the currency that energy is traded in. So whether you're an importer or an exporter, you either have to hold dollars to pay for your energy, or you're receiving dollars in exchange for it. So everybody owns the US dollar, and you have now made it a national security imperative to find a way to not ever be in the position Russia was in. And who knows? I mean, look, do you remember when the French were on the outs with the US because of, remember freedom fries, that whole thing, because they wouldn't go into Iraq? You have no idea what political decision might put you on the outs with America, and you simply cannot take that risk.
Well, it might just be Donald on a bad day.
Yeah, it could be anything. It literally could be anything. But there's a concrete example of what can happen, and you can't roll the dice with your foreign exchange reserves and say, look, we'll be fine. He's never going to do that to us. So you've now incentivized, and not only have you incentivized all these countries, you've made it an absolute necessity for them to find an alternative, gradually, maybe, admittedly, but they need to diversify out of the dollar. They cannot hold all their reserves in dollars. And that changes the world completely, because all these countries now, no matter what's going on with tariffs, they're all now sitting there thinking, okay, what can we possibly own instead of dollars? And we all know what the answer is, because we've seen it happen ever since that day. We've just seen central bank after central bank buying as much gold as they can get their hands on. And that is always going to be the solution. And you can talk about Bitcoin strategic reserves all you want, but ultimately these central banks are going to say the only asset that's nobody's liability that we can put in a vault with our soldiers guarding it is gold. Period. That's it. And it's been that way for hundreds of years. And so that's changed everything. And so this run of gold to 3,100 or wherever it is today is it shouldn't be a surprise to people unless they focus on the price, because now it's gone through that magical 3,000 barrier. But if you think about the incentives, then the incentives are for people to own more gold, not less. The incentives are not to sell it because it's at 3,000. They are to buy more because it's going to 5,000 or 10,000. Here come those headlines again. But it's really important to understand the way the financial system works, the dollar and gold's place in it, and how those have now changed based on that one decision which came from Treasury, not the Fed. And supposedly some pretty well-connected people have told me that the first the Fed knew about it was when Treasury told them that's what they were doing. So again, move fast, break things, great. Not necessarily on a geopolitical level, and not necessarily on a country level. So we're going to find out how that plays out, but the incentives have changed dramatically.
We've touched on debt. How do you feel about bonds generally at the moment? Would you be a better buyer or a better seller?
Again, as a trader, I suspect we could see a rally in bonds as the tariff-driven talks of a recession and Great Depression increase. You could definitely see a rally. I wouldn't want to hold bonds for a long period. I wouldn't want duration. I wouldn't want to be in things that I can't get out of, and it would definitely be a trade to be longer bonds. I think things have changed. I think interest rates, the path of least resistance is higher. They're going to be forced to try and keep those down because with them come an awful lot of problems. But if you have changed the system the way we've been talking about, it's going to be very, very difficult for the US to raise the amount of money that they need to fund their deficits at these kind of interest rates. And obviously, the changes in terms of supply chains, in terms of inflationary pressures of tariffs, in terms of inflationary pressures of bringing manufacturing back to America, all of these suggest higher prices. And while I understand that it could lead to a recession, that might be good for bonds in the short term, but I think inflation is the problem that people need to be most worried about if you're not a trader. If you're taking a longer term view, okay, again, like I did in 2003, what do I need to be worried about? It's inflation.
And if that inflation is stickily higher than consensus, then the logical next conclusion. So that's not necessarily good for stocks either.
It shouldn't be, particularly with the multiples they're trading on. And I think we're seeing a bit of that adjustment. I don't think all of this is tariff related. I think the weakness in some of these stocks from the beginning of the year is absolutely down to valuations and earnings and all the kind of things that used to matter. But when you take momentum away and you add uncertainty, suddenly people find religion and they start looking at, they don't look at adjusted EBITDA, they start looking at cash flows and they start looking at margins, and they start looking at all the things that matter to a business, whether you like it or not. And again, it changes behavior.
We seem to be rapidly whittling through asset classes. How do you feel about Pokemon cards?
Now, physical ones or NFTs, Tim?
Oh my God! I haven't heard that prospect yet. I mean, we had, I think, Dominic Frisby on a while back, and we were talking about crypto, and I suggested that we should launch Ponzi coin, but apparently someone's already done that.
Oh, I'm sure they have. There will be a Tim Price coin out there somewhere. I mean, look, it's and again, I come back to this idea of.
I quite like the idea of coin, because you'll use those things that make you go,
Oh, but look, Tim, substance.
Are you trading any
Give me substance. Just give me substance. And I just want something that's real and has real value. And I just the NFTs and all this stuff, there's a promise of value there. There is a promise of value, and it may or may not come to fruition. And if you're a trader or a gambler, great. But at this point in my life, I'm 58, and I'm much more concerned with making dumb decisions and giving away the things that I've worked my entire adult life for and depriving my kids of that, than I am the chance to get a 1,000 bagger on Fartcoin. I just don't care about that stuff. But for the people that do, go with God. Good luck to everybody. I hope they all get filthy rich off it.
So we were talking about the hubris of America, effectively, and we've seen the dollar going down pretty damn fast. From a technical point of view, when they first started talking about tariffs, the dollar index had anticipated it, I think, to a large extent, and the dollar had gone up into the Trump victory, but then went no higher in the first stages of negotiations. As we speak, it is dumping pretty hard. I think if you're an American looking at your currency going down at such a rapid rate, it's going to make you want to look at hard assets if ever there was a time to be doing it. Do you have a view on the dollar and or the currency markets from here?
Well, I think the difficulty though, Trump's told you, Powell's told you, Bessent's told you they want the dollar down. I mean, it's not often you get American policymakers not talking about a strong dollar, but kind of wink out the side of their mouth. You know what we really mean. They're actually saying that we want the dollar down, and if you don't believe them, that's up to you. But they're telling you what they want, and they're getting it. And I think they're probably going to get it in a way that surprises them and becomes a problem for them. But I think the reasons for finding ways around the dollar, as we've already spoken about, have been building for a while, and the advantage, I guess, that the US has is that it's tough to find another currency that you'd want to own more. If you're a trader, it's different. You can trade things like the yen around. There'd be great entry and exit points to trade the yen, which has moved so far in that direction that it's very, very responsive to small policy changes, and I suspect there could be some big policy changes coming in Japan. So you've got great trading opportunities with the dollar. But if you are thinking to yourself, do I want to own dollar assets? Am I going to be, again, is my purchasing power going to be protected in those assets? Are they going to climb? It's a much less trickier yes today than it was a couple of years ago. Much trickier. And so, for me, I'm not. I stopped trading a few years ago because I did that for a long time, and as soon as I couldn't sit in front of the screens all day and actually be on top of things, I realized that I had to stop trading, and so I have done. So I haven't been trading anything for a long time. I invest in much longer term ideas, and my prime goal, as I've said, is to not make any dumb decisions and not give away things. But I think the one thing that Trump is going to give you if you are a trader is an extraordinary set of opportunities to make money trading. The one thing I would be very, very clear about cautioning people on is that there are an awful lot of people out there who believe that they're traders, and they have become traders in the last 10 years at a time
traffic.
when... I'm sorry?
It's been one-way traffic.
It's been one-way traffic, and you've also had every single tailwind you're ever going to get. You've had, costs coming down. You've had interest for cost of capital zero. You've had
globalization.
You've had multiple expansions. You've had every single thing going for you that meant trading meant buy the dip. That was the trade, was buy the dip and then sell it when it raised. But essentially everyone was trading from the long side. And so you're going to find out very quickly, now that we've injected this volatility back into things, how good a trader you are. And having done it for 35 years, I can promise you that there will be far more people who find out they are terrible traders than who find out they are good traders. Because I was a pretty average trader. I managed to keep my job, and that tells me I wasn't a complete failure. But I've worked with great traders, and they're very, very different, and they're very, very rare. And so if you think about how many people are now traders, millions of people who call themselves traders, it's going to be a bloodbath when things start performing in a way that doesn't fit the narrative that's been built assiduously for a decade plus now, and dragged all these people in. So be very, 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 very careful, and that comes from someone who has traded for a long time and is so happy that I'm not doing it anymore right now.
Presumably, the very best traders recognise when they've no longer got an edge, and then discreetly withdraw from the battlefield.
Yeah, absolutely. And the very best traders, no great trader has ever bought a bottom or sold a top, ever. They just don't. They don't wait for that. As soon as the wind shifts and the probabilities of them getting caught offside rise, they're out, having made their money, and they put it away and they sit, and they're happy to sit on the sidelines and do nothing for months on end until they find the right opportunity. And today, society and all the apps and all the ways that people are being lured into trading, they prioritize and they glorify constant trading. If you're not trading, you might as well not bother. You've got to be in the market. You've got to be doing something. You've got to have positions on, and it's a guaranteed way. There's a reason why all these betting platforms, MGM Bet, and all these things. There's a reason why they give you $100 in free bets. That's their hook, because they know you're going to give all that back and more. And the same goes for trading in spades.
They always say the first drug deal is always free.
Yeah, that's right. I remember I interviewed Kyle Bass many years ago for the Real Vision podcast, and I said to him, "What was the biggest setback you've had in your career?" And he said, "You know what?" He said, "The thing that cost me the most money," he said, "the very first stock I shorted went to zero." He said, "That cost me an absolute fortune, because I made all this money on this trade and went, oh, how easy is this?" And of course, I lost the next 10 trades. I lost because I assumed they were all going to go to zero. And when they started to go down, I doubled up and I pressed and I gave it all back and more. And that's exactly it. When things turn against you, if you don't have the wherewithal to step back and say, okay, I do not understand this market right now. And a lot of people are going to be feeling that, because buy the dip is not going to work. If you haven't got the wherewithal and the ability and the self-awareness to step back and say, I don't understand what's going on, so it's best that I do nothing, you're going to find yourself in a world of hurt.
So do you invest in equities in times, in value stocks, when you think that's the right time, and then you go to 100% cash when you think things are overvalued, but with a core portfolio of precious metals? Would that be a good description?
Yeah, I've accumulated gold over the years. I've got private investments that aren't marked to market every day in companies that, I have visibility on what they're doing, and I understand the business, and I know how they're performing. I have some private loans to credits that I know are rock solid, that pay me a decent coupon, and that's it. I've simplified everything. I haven't had a position in equities for some time now. I've got my precious metals. I'm more interested in safe income than trying to find the next 10 bagger. But I'm fully aware that if we do get a proper market correction, if we do get a chance where good companies are selling at low valuations, I would have no qualms about piling back into equity markets, but they will be investments, they won't be trades. I will buy things that I know, like in 1982, you could buy the Dow, the S&P, and you'd never have to worry about it for the rest of your life. 6% dividend yield, 6 times earnings. If you can buy good companies on those sort of multiples, do it all day long and sleep very, very well at night. And I want to sleep. I want to sleep, and gold allows me to sleep. The businesses, I don't want to say companies, I don't want to say stocks. The businesses that I've invested in allow me to sleep at night, and the credits that I'm a creditor for allow me to sleep at night. And that's much more important to me than taking a flyer and getting a stock tip that something's going to double, that's going to go up 5 times, and sitting there and not having the visibility I need on what's going on and hoping that it's right. It just at my stage of life, it's not a sensible thing for me to do, and so I choose not to do it.
Tim mentioned earlier about how would you sort of impart your knowledge to your kids and grandkids. I've got 2 myself. My daughter's going to be 18 this year. My son's 14. I try to talk to them about finance. They're not really very interested, and it's almost worse when you're really interested in it and you really want to protect their future. But I'm almost the wrong person to do it, because it's like you're in that position where they don't. Part of being a kid is you don't listen to your parents, right? Do you find that, and how do you actually protect them or impart that wisdom without actually just making the financial decisions for them? Because I'd rather they learnt it and did it themselves rather than I did.
Yeah, it's really difficult, Paul. It's really difficult. Sometimes the opportunity presents itself. I've had both my kids in the last few years looking to buy their first house, and that gives you a window, because if they're going to buy a house, they're going to come to you and ask either for money or advice or both. And so that gives you a window to talk about things with them. One of the greatest things actually ever was Richard Russell, who's sadly no longer with us, used to write the Dow Theory letters. And he wrote an article, which anyone listening to this can find online. It's called Rich Man, Poor Man. And in that article, he has a set of compounding tables. And he tells this story and he shows the compounding tables. And there's a guy who puts, it's a theoretical 10% interest rate that's constant throughout. And there's a guy that puts, whatever it is, let's call it $10 a year in for 5 years and then stops. And there's another guy who puts $10 in on that 5th year and does it basically for another 40 years. And he never catches the guy that put the 5 in and stops because of compound interest. And when you show this article and show these tables to kids, I found that to have a profound effect, because it just shows you, it's like this guy just let interest do its job for him, and there was no stress, and he didn't have to put any more money in. And it's something like that, just these little powerful examples. And we've all, I think, the 3 of us in our careers, we've all got stories, we've all seen things, but they're very difficult to relate to, because we learn them.
You have to experience it yourself.
Exactly,
you have to experience it
exactly,
yourself.
Tim. And we learn them as practitioners, not as curious outsiders. And I've said to my kids so many times, I've bored them to death with it. I've said, look, there are things I can teach you, but there are things you're going to have to learn. And I wish that I could teach you the things you're going to have to learn, and I'll try, but you won't listen to me, or you'll ignore me, and I totally understand why, and then you'll learn. And they're all going to be painful, but hopefully if you can try and learn them once and once only, you'll do just fine. And that's this whole idea of finance, because it's our world and it's the water we swim in. It's that old story about the 2 goldfish. It's been the water we've swum in for decades, and so it's native to us. And we understand the pitfalls, and we see the trade-offs, and we see the dangers. But it's very difficult to explain that, to your point, Paul, to kids who they don't have a real interest in it until money becomes important to them, when they're trying to either save for something or build a life or do something. That's the window that you have when you can sit them down and hopefully try and impart some of that knowledge. Or your point is right, they don't listen to their parents. Point them towards people you know that they probably will listen to, because they're not their parents who can give them advice, or who can, read this or listen to this guy, whatever it may be. You get these windows, and you have to make hay when that sun shines, because that's your chance to say, hey, I know you're asking these questions, listen to this or read this, and it'll really help you understand it. And if you've got any questions afterwards, come and talk to me.
I try to, with stage one, encourage them to find something that they absolutely love and they want to do. I don't want them to take a job just because they've got to pay the rent. And I think that's the most important thing. If you weren't doing what you're doing, what would you be doing?
Well, I'd be in Augusta getting ready to play in the Masters as favourite next week is what I'd be doing.
I mean, like, if you seriously went in, is that your personality? You'd be so driven by golf that you would be, you'd be out there every single day and you'd be the best at it.
Absolutely not, and anyone who's played golf with me can attest to that. So I've got hundreds of witnesses scattered around the world. No, do you know what? It's funny because I grew up wanting to be in finance. I wanted to be in markets, and I loved my time in them, and it gave me a chance to travel all over the world and meet some extraordinary people. And then through a series of wild and possibly stupid decisions, ended up in this kind of media world, first to Real Vision and now doing this. And I've found that what motivates me now, and what I love about what I do, is just this opportunity to share ideas with people and be educated. I feel that I'm educated far more than I educate, just from the people I talk to, and I'm so grateful and privileged to have the chance to sit and talk to the people I talk to, and for them to give me their most precious asset in time, and spend a day talking with me. And I've learned so much, and I love it. I just love, I'm curious, and I'm afforded the opportunity to indulge that curiosity and hopefully share the lessons that I've learned from my own curiosity with other people. And it's been an incredible 10 odd years now that I've done this, and I love every minute. And at some point, I'm sure I will retire, but I struggle to imagine how that will happen while I'm still enjoying this as much as I am.
Because the markets found you, didn't they, Tim? As opposed to...
Yeah, I came into this business completely by accident. It wasn't by design. It was a complete lack of any other job offers back in the early 90s.
Because you were going to be a copywriter, weren't you? Was that?
Yeah, I was interested in two things, either journalism or advertising, and thank Christ for everything that happened, that neither of those eventualities actually came to pass. Otherwise, I think I would have had a miserable and much shorter career.
Well, I think you'd have
ended up... you as a Don Draper-like figure.
I think you'd have ended up a bit like Rory Sutherland if you'd gone into advertising.
I may have ended up weighing as much as Rory Sutherland, certainly, and that's not a criticism of Rory, because he's a fantastic writer and thinker.
I love his thought process. But it's
So on the basis of that experience alone, my strong suggestion to many people is, or as an idea, is you want to get your second best outcome. You don't want to get your best one. You want to be slightly disappointed in something.
Really?
Yeah, because I think you can get bored with perfection quite quickly. Well, you get everything you wanted. It's a bit like Grant's story about Kyle Bass's first successful trade. It really ruins you.
Well, I always thought that the job that you should find, or the thing that you should be doing, is something that you would do whether you get paid or not. I mean, we do the podcast just because we love doing the podcast. It's not for the money, because there isn't. Well, there is money in podcasting, but we don't do it for that. We do it for all the reasons that Grant's just mentioned. It's just... But
I think where Grant was absolutely spot on was when he used the word authentic, that whatever you do, you should do it in an authentic way.
Yes.
And the reason I'm happy with my lot is because I wanted to work in journalism, but I've ended up doing it by default as part and crowbarring it into the day job. So I'm as happy as Larry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the lessons I've learned, is that if your motivation is authentic, it comes across. If you're making decisions in the content business or in journalism or whatever you want to call it, if you're making decisions around, okay, how do I get a bigger audience? It might work in the short term, But if that's your end goal, you're constantly having to reinvent yourself to add the next cohort to your audience, and you lose the people you came with along the way. There was a terrific clip that I saw on social media a couple of days ago with Rick Rubin, and he was talking about how everything he does, and this guy's a creative genius, everything he does is for himself. He's like, I don't think of my audience at all. And that really resonated with me, because I've been asked these questions before, and that's been my answer. And I whenever I've said that, I said, look, I don't write, I write for myself. Every time I sit down to write, I'm writing for myself. I'm writing about something that I'm curious about, and I want to understand. And I feel like by trying to understand it and writing down the process of my understanding of it, that will come through, and other people might come to understand something better, and it might set them off down a journey, whatever it is. But I've never once sat down and thought, I wonder what my audience would like me to write about this week, ever. And I always felt slightly self-conscious about that, because when people would ask me that question, it hasn't happened often, but on the few times it has, I would hear myself saying it and think, geez, does that come across as arrogant? I don't mean it to be. And it's not. It's a genuine belief that if something I'm writing about comes from a genuine, authentic place, it's going to be better. And Rick Rubin, this clip of Rick Rubin was like, all the good stuff I've done has been something that I truly, authentically cared about. It was nothing to do with anyone else's reaction to it. It was all about my desire to do this. And I saw it yesterday and I was like, oh, thank God. I just suddenly felt like I wasn't alone anymore. But I think it's true. I think if people talk about Machiavelli and the ends justifying the means, I think if you make the end pressing publish on something that you're proud of and you feel like is good work, let the rest take care of itself. And don't worry about, I should really write about tariffs this month because that's what everyone wants to hear about. I don't know what to say, but I'll have to think of something because that's what everyone wants to read. You're never going to do your best work. No matter, and that goes for what we're talking about here. It goes for anything. I mean, anything that you're doing, you have to be doing it because you want to do a good job and you're interested in it, rather than you've got a deadline to meet and, oh, geez, I better put something out because it's almost Sunday.
The public are very good at spotting something that's insincere.
I think so.
But if you can fake authenticity really well, then you're absolutely made.
That's right. You've got it made. That's right. I forget who said that to me, but it's such a great quote. If you can fake sincerity, you've got it made.
It sounds like Marx, one of the Marx brothers.
Groucho Marx, yeah. Groucho.
These are my principles. If you don't like them, well, I have others.
I've got others, yeah.
Brilliant. With your outlook for being able to sleep at night, you've got your portfolio that you're happy with, you seem all set. What are the plans that you have for the future? Will there be another book in the offing, or are you busy enough with all the other projects that you're doing?
Look, I've never written a book. I've had a lot of people say to me, "Oh, you should write a book," and I've said there's no way I'll ever write a book, and I mean that, and one day maybe I do, but it won't mean that I didn't mean it at the time when I said I would never write a book. It would have to be a book that I suddenly woke up one day and thought, oh man, I really want to write a book about that. It can't be someone coming to me and say, hey, you know what, you should write a book about this. That would never work for me. I'm bookended in my personal life by two grandkids who are 6 and 4, and my father who's 86, and I'm spending as much time as I can with both of those bookends. Because I realise that my grandkids aren't going to be these magical ages forever, and I realise that my father's not going to be around forever. And so, in the last year or two, I've done everything I can to make sure that I prioritise that and work as fit in around that, rather than me saying, well, I can't do this or I can't do that because I should really go and give a speech here or go to a conference there or whatever it may be. And I've had some extraordinary experiences with them, both my grandkids and my father, that your money just couldn't possibly buy. And so I try to worry less about the markets, even though the world is a worrying place. And I, as the father of kids and the grandfather of grandkids, I do worry about the world they're going to inherit. But I'm aware enough to know that there's not that much I can do to affect the outcome. So I try not to worry too much about that, and I try to just focus on doing the best I can with my work and spending time with my family and my friends. And I think COVID was a wake up call for everybody in very, very different ways. And I've had so much abuse from my mates when they hear me whinge about being stuck in the Cayman Islands for COVID. There's zero sympathy, but being here with a daughter in Sydney and a daughter in London and elderly parents in France, and the borders being closed and not being able to leave was a real wake up call for me. And so I didn't see my youngest daughter for about 3 years because of the months preceding COVID when I didn't see her. And in Australia, was crazy in terms of its lockdown policy. So it was almost 3 years that I didn't get to see my youngest daughter. And I went down to Australia when they opened the borders, and I swore to myself first and to her that is never going to happen again. And so since then, I've gone down to Australia for a month every year, and I'll do that. And I suspect as my workload ultimately declines, I will spend more time down there with her, because that's the stuff. We can talk about markets all day long. We can talk about what Trump might do, what the tariffs might mean, whether the moon landing was real. We can talk about all these things all day long, and it's all fascinating to think about and to ponder over and to try and decipher. But ultimately, the most fun I've had in the last few years has not been thinking about tariffs and Trump and gold. It's been taking my grandkids to a petting zoo, or it's been going to football with my dad, and those things, I think transcend markets. They transcend making money. They transcend all these things, because sooner or later, there will always be a chance. The markets are always going to be there. They're always going to be there. Your parents might not be, and your grandkids will be grown and doing their own thing before you know it. So that's absolutely been my focus for a few years, and I suspect will become more so in the years to come.
For some reason, I thought that your newsletters had been compiled into a book. That's why I thought you'd already had a book released.
I did think about that, Paul. I thought about putting a compendium together, but I mean, I've got 15 years of these things. I don't think anyone's going to wade back through 15 years of my nonsense.
Oh, but you'd be surprised.
I managed to get a book out of it, Grant, so it can be done, I assure you.
Well, look, I tell you, if the two of you promise you'll buy a copy, full freight, no mates rates, maybe I'll think about it.
Definitely.
Done.
Absolutely. I'll buy 10. How about that?
Steady on now. Steady on.
No,
you can edit that. You can edit it out.
No, I definitely will. We'll give it as a prize on our 200th episode.
Grant, is there anything that we haven't discussed that you'd like to discuss, or would have liked to discuss?
The one thing that I would guess talk about, and this is kind of a bit of a hobby horse of mine for the last year or so, and I put a presentation together last year that I've given multiple times, and it's not the sort of thing people expect when I get up to speak, and I'm sure there's a wave of disappointment that goes through when they hear the subject matter. But by the end of it has not failed to generate some discussion afterwards, which has been interesting. And that's the title of the thing was "Who Are You?" And it fits very well with what we've been talking about here, because the premise of it was this idea based on all the things we've talked about in terms of how trading has become ubiquitous, and gambling, and all these things that are being done to kind of bring people into markets and get them at the roulette table. And I put this presentation together called "Who Are You?" And I went through this idea of trying to say to people that before you do any of this, you need to look in the mirror and you need to understand who you are, because you'll hear everybody who's in this game, whether professionally or tangentially or for fun, the word investor gets bandied around all the time. Oh yeah, I'm an investor. I invest my money. I'm in Nvidia this week, and I flipped those, and then I invested in this and I invested in that. And the point I was trying to make with this presentation was that that's not investing, that's speculating, and that's totally fine, right? It's there's nothing wrong with being a speculator. There's nothing wrong with being an investor. The problem comes when you don't know which one you are, or you think you're one and you're the other. And this word investor, it sounds so much better than speculator. Calling yourself an investor, it just sounds so much better because it sounds thoughtful and it sounds like a lot of work's gone into everything, and it's got some weight to it. And speculator is basically a glorified gambler in the eyes of someone who just hears that word. And so you get all these people call themselves investors, but who are just rank speculators, and the damage that can happen if you think you're one and you're the other is getting more and more serious by the day. And so I'm happy to share I put a PDF together of the presentation, which I'm very happy to share with you guys if anyone wants it. And the PDF basically is the speech I gave plus all the charts. So it reads like a speech, so it's pretty easy to follow, and all the charts are in there. But this idea, particularly now with the increased volatility that Trump has introduced into the markets, it's never been more important to before anything else, know who you are, know what your risk tolerance is, know why you're in this and what you're trying to achieve. Because if you're a speculator and you believe you're investing, it's going to be really bad. If you're an investor and you're actually speculating, it could be even worse. So to everybody listening to this, just take a good, honest look in the mirror and really understand, am I looking to commit capital for a long-term plan? Am I looking to invest in a business, or am I looking to buy a stock? The ultimate outcome is the same. You're going to press a button on your computer and you're going to own something. But if you're investing in a business, it's a very, very different mindset to buying a stock. If you buy a stock, the implication by default is that you're going to sell that stock. So it's all about price. If you're investing in a business, it's all about, okay, what's that business doing? Is the business doing well? Should I sell my stake in the business because it's not being run effectively? There's a whole set of different decisions being making, and all of those decisions stem from the answer to that one question: am I an investor or am I a speculator? And if you can clear that up, and if you can get it straight in your own mind and push aside any wish to be an investor because it kind of sounds much better, own it. There's nothing wrong with it. There's some incredible speculators who've made, read the story of Jesse Livermore. An extraordinary speculator who made untold fortunes. Now, those who know him, we can probably edit the bit where he ended up committing suicide, but that's a whole other story. But the point being, you can build fabulous fortunes being a speculator if you're good at it.
All my money was made from sitting
right,
and waiting.
So that that's just one thing that as I say, I've kind of been banging that drum for a while now, just in an attempt to get people to just ask that one simple question. And wherever I've gone and wherever I've given that speech and where I've spoken to people, the response has been fantastic, and it's sparked all kinds of discussions and hopefully help people understand themselves before they try and start understanding those markets.
I used to teach at the City University in the early 90s in technical analysis, and at that time there weren't enough crashes and big market bubbles to talk about. So I'd have to go so I'd have to refer to the 1929, 1987 crashes and say, look, this can happen in the future. It seems like now there's been so many bubbles and crashes. There's a lot of material with which that we can refer to. Maybe we're in the super bubble and we're going to see that collapse. But what was interesting, I was doing some work with a company that would take in traders, and I was teaching them over various quarters. And each quarter, they would come in with a different amount of market volatility. And the ones that came in around 2008 learned to trade in that environment where it was so volatile. So they expected the markets to swing around that in that way as inverted commas, the norm. And what I was always trying to teach them is that the markets are in constant change. I know it's a phrase that gets used a lot, but that the only thing you can bank on is change, and whatever you think is normal will become abnormal. So high interest rates, low interest rates, negative interest rates, rising stock markets, crashing stock markets, inflation, deflation, disinflation, hyperinflation, all these things are coming at some stage. And to think that just because you've started trading at this point in time, that you get sort of suckered into this being the norm. So it sort of speaks to what you're saying here about we're in this cycle. And I wonder whether we're in this cycle that in 1929 to 30, there was this big peak, of course, and a big peak in speculation. And we're heading towards 100 years from that. And then after that, owning stocks was almost considered to be something that you would just never do. It was just crazy. And that's always stuck with me, that what must have the emotion have been like around that time, that it was, you just would never think about owning stocks when that's all people think about right now. And so
we had the same in the early 80s, if you remember, Paul. The same thing, right? The death of equities cover on Time or Newsweek was 1981, late 81, early 82, I think. And that was it. No one's going to own equities anymore. But that was exactly the time to buy them. But buy them for the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think there's a difference. I think that there was almost a disgust about owning equities, as opposed to, it was like, possibly in the same way that maybe when the bubble burst, owning altcoins will be viewed as just pure folly, perhaps. But it was that, and it took a long time before people stepped back into the markets. And so in terms of the fourth turning and your view of where we are, is that the sort of change that you expect to see?
Well, the attitude change with regards to speculation happens when people lose a lot of money, and it's not until then. So we've seen, if you a great example is if you pay attention to two terrific stocks, GameStop and AMC. If you pay attention to those two stocks, and more importantly, the narrative around them. We had these apes who were going to stick it to the short sellers and all this kind of stuff. And if you watch the shift in the comments on Twitter from the CEO, particularly of AMC, Adam Aron, you saw at the beginning when the stock was going absolutely asymptotic. You saw all this, Adam Aron, he's doing God's work, he's sticking it to the shorts, and he's an amazing guy, and we're all stand with you, Alan, and diamond hands and ape strong together and all this stuff. And if you look at the stock chart, the 5-year stock chart of AMC, it's the most extraordinary but inevitable stock chart any of us who have been in these markets for any time will ever see. I mean, it captures everything. And the stock's effectively gone back to zero, despite having gone up however many times in the period when it was the focus. And Adam Aron, the CEO, has been let's choose our words carefully, brutally efficient on behalf of the company. Let's call it that, by issuing tens of millions of shares to all these people that were standing behind him and helping him stick it to the short sellers. He's diluted them in ways that you can't even believe. It's the share issuance equivalent of Bonnie Blue, and watching now when he posts, he's still posting the same kind of messages about the company when the results come out and they're terrible. He's saying, here's where the box office was during COVID, and here's where it is now, and we've done a great job, and blah, blah, blah. Only now all the messages are, you screwed me, I lost my life savings because of you, you're an asshole. The narrative has shifted, and he's never getting that crowd back. That crowd are never, there's still a few hardcore believers in there, of course there is, you always get the real pure zealots. But he's never getting that crowd back. And that is an object lesson in what will happen to the market as a whole when the market goes down, as we know it can.
When buy the dip doesn't work anymore.
Exactly. When buy the dip becomes sell the rip, it takes way too long for people to spot that shift. And when the market chart looks similar to AMC's chart, then this broad, quote unquote, investing public, who are inveterate gamblers on 0-day options and the Robinhood app and all this stuff, the market will lose them. And I mean lose them for good, because they'll have lost all their money. They will be so disenchanted with the whole thing, and you won't get them back. And that's why you get these generational shifts when, to your point, Paul, nobody wanted to own equities after the 29 crash. Nobody wanted to own them after the market slid in the 70s. Nobody wanted to own tech stocks after the dot-com bubble. It took 15 years for the NASDAQ to get back to where it was.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to own them. You couldn't give these things away because no one believes anymore. And we will get there. We will absolutely get there again. It's inevitable. Jim Grant, who is an absolute, that man's a god.
National treasure.
God to me. He has this great line about how, knowledge in science is cumulative, but in finance it's cyclical, and it's so true. It's perfect, because we do forget. Because you know what, in science, for the most part, the aim isn't money. The aim isn't to make money. It's to achieve a cause. Now we can talk about Pfizer and Moderna all that, but that's probably a conversation for another day. But the scientists in the labs doing that stuff to try and cure cancer and cure Parkinson's, it's not about the money. But with the stock market and people speculating, it's absolutely about the money. And so when the money goes away, especially when you feel it's been taken from you, you're like, I'm done with this. I'm never touching that again. I can't take this pain ever again. And we'll get there. We'll get there again, and it will crush a whole new generation of quote unquote investors who are really speculators. And the investors will come along and they'll pick up the pieces at valuations that allow them to truly invest. And it was ever thus, and it will ever more be so. And there will be lessons learned and tales to tell and cautionary tales. And the next generation will be shy about investing in equities because they saw their parents lose money, and they heard the stories from their dad about how this stupid guy AMC stole all his money and never believe a huckster CEO. And the cycle will go around again. But the only people who will take advantage of it are the investors, the people who see true value and can invest in that business in a way that they can sleep at night. They don't need the price to go up. They just need the business to perform, and the business is a solid business and it does perform. And if the stock price doesn't go up, great. They get dividends and they do okay out of it, and the business is just getting better. And at some point, guess what? The speculation comes in and they see this business that looks undervalued and it catches up. Tim, our great mate Tony Deedon has told me some terrific stories about this stuff, as I'm sure he has you over the years. But he told me a fantastic story about a guy he knew, and I'll change a lot of these things out of deference to Tony. But a guy who had a florist shop in a town where Tony lived, and it was an extraordinary florist shop, and there was a queue out the door, and absolutely amazing shop, and it was doing really, really well. And the guy ran the shop. It was him, maybe his partner, or there were a couple of them running the shop. Every day is a queue out the shop. He's sold out of stuff at midday, and the shop closes down. And Tony's chatting with this guy, and he said, what do you do with this business? This is obviously a great business. The guy said, it's very simple. He said, at the end of the year, I take my profits and I invest it in real estate in Klosters, the ski resort. I buy chalets. And that's what I do. That's it. It's very simple. And, at one point, someone from, I think it was Goldman Sachs, but that just may be a bias, but someone from an investment bank, maybe it was Julius Baer or Pictet, someone came along to see this guy and said, oh, look, we've seen this shop of yours. It's absolutely extraordinary. We want to lend you some money so you can expand. You could open 4 or 5 of these florist shops in different villages. We want to lend you the money, and just think what you could do by building this franchise model. It'd be incredible. And the guy said, why on earth would I do that? I don't want it. I've got to find staff that will run the business the way I run the business. I've got to do all this stuff. I've got a very simple strategy here. I run my shop. I love it. I invest my money in real estate. That's it. And this was years ago. And here he is, 30 years later with the one shop that is still immaculate, is beautifully run. The customers are there every day. And he now owns half of Clusters. And so this idea about a business as opposed to a stock price is such an important distinction for people to understand, because everything has become about the stock price. And the reality is it's the business. And the other story from Tony that will drive this home is a CEO in which Tony had an investment. And I've actually met this guy, an extraordinary man, and it was an extraordinary business. And Tony was there to see him and just to get an update on how the business was doing. And they're sitting talking about the business and, talking about the business. And at some point, the subject of the stock price came up, and the CEO of this company said to Tony, he said, what is our stock price these days? And if you think about that, and you think about how in America particularly, I think it's very different in the US and Europe, how every CEO probably has a live ticker on their stock price in their office because they're incentivized by options, they're incentivized by all this. This guy, it was like he had no idea what the company's stock price was, because he didn't care. All he cared about was making sure the business worked, and he was making smart decisions that would first of all ensure the future of the business, and then only after it ensured its future, how do we grow it in a sensible, thoughtful way that doesn't put the business at risk? That's investing in a business, not buying a stock. And again, back to this investor speculator thing, the distinctions between the two are subtle, but also enormous.
I wanted to ask you about AI, and I think you've kind of answered the question. AI in finance, you couldn't use AI to find a model like the one that you've just mentioned, the story that you've just mentioned, the subtleties of what you've just mentioned. Do you think AI will take over in finance?
I think like everything that has the nature of this AI, it is a classic hype bubble, and there has been massive overinvestment in it already. But that's not to say it won't ultimately be an extraordinary boon, which I think it will be. But Wall Street will always latch onto something like this and drag money out of people's pockets to invest in it. Always. We saw this with all the fiber optic stuff in the 2000s. All these companies, Global Crossing and MCI WorldCom, and all these companies that went belly up after being touted as the next great thing. The internet was still there, and because those companies went belly up, we ended up with people picking up the assets for pennies on the dollar, and we ended up with cheap internet for everybody, which was great. And that's how the cycle and how creative destruction is supposed to work. We've kind of abrogated that over the last 20 plus years and tried to extend this cycle. And AI, I think, is going to be a phenomenal tool in things like research. There are going to be places in the financial world where AI is going to be absolutely extraordinary. But the one thing that finance has that people aren't about to give up to AI is finance is where the money is. And because of the importance of the money to a lot of the human beings at the top of finance, they're going to want to make very, very sure they keep their hands on the money spigots. So AI will be a tool, and I think it has the potential to be an extraordinarily valuable tool. But these two things can be true at the same time. It's going to be an extraordinary tool, and it's a massive capex bubble. And how that resolves itself in the months and years to come, we've got plenty of blueprints for that. There will be a lot of money torched, and we've, the billions raised and the enormous valuation of some of these AI companies just aren't justified, and I suspect won't be justified. NVIDIA is slightly different because they make something physical that people need, but again, if you don't think NVIDIA is going to be disrupted, then I don't think you've been paying attention. It will be, but at the moment, it's the only game in town. So the market just rinse, repeat. AI will have a place. It's going to be extraordinarily useful to certain people. But once you're bored of creating a Studio Ghibli image of a picture you've got of you and your cat, that fades into the background, and the people that actually do things with these things will do it. But it doesn't have a general application, because all these things are fads that, look what AI can do, look what I can do with my pictures, amazing. And then 2 weeks later you've moved on. But you're creating things that real creatives can use and change the world with. But that doesn't mean that every AI company should be trading on 100 times multiples, and it does mean that at some point none of them will be.
We've come from banking backgrounds and trading backgrounds within banks. Will there be AI traders that take the jobs of those said, those previous traders from before, and then will it extend into longer time frames potentially? And will there be?
Well, I think we've seen that, Paul. Right? We've seen that with all the high frequency trading. We've seen that. We've seen computer traders for a decade plus now. That's a constant now. I'm sure there are AI models that are training, to shape your portfolio, and that's going to be the next hook. People, you come to here and have our AI selected portfolio tailored to you and your exact needs. And look, I mean, it's going to happen because it's a great way to get people in as customers. So it will happen. It will be used. It will ultimately be abused, and some of it will work and some of it won't. And the nature of markets and the fact that a market is nothing more than the collective representation of the emotions of everybody involved in it, means it's essentially impossible for AI to be perfectly successful in that, because AI doesn't have emotion, and you can train AI on emotion, but
when stroppy AI gets on the scene, that's when it'll all change.
Yeah, you and me, Timmy, curmudgeon AI. You and I, we can. I think this is a way forward for you and me.
Don't fight it. Don't fight the future, Grant.
Yeah. Open Meldrew, we'll call it.
I've often wondered, because it actually looks at market history, and of course it has to learn from market history, whatever patterns it's learning, it won't have enough history to then predict what's about to happen. And that's by the very nature of the markets, that it does things that are outside the parameters of what you expect. And so I'd expect AI models to be caught out by that. But whether it extends out into this area of investment where we're all looking for other jobs because we've just got our AI bots that are doing it for us, I don't see that. But I just wondered whether that was something that could be coming down.
Yeah, look, I'm sure someone will try it, because it's going to be a great hook, right? Oh yeah, our AI traders are the best. Who wouldn't want to put money with an AI trader that's the best? But again, I look, it's funny, and it comes back to this relationship with money, and over the years, because money has become worthless, on its way to being worthless, people's stewardship of it gets more lax, because it's been much easier to make and it's been much cheaper to borrow. So anything that's free by definition has no value. And so people have become much less cautious with their stewardship of money. There's always been this feeling that, well, I can make more. It's so easy to make money these days, and if I can't, I can always borrow money, and it's really easy to borrow money. And money. And
you also see the rise of the bezel.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the proximity to it, right? The proximity gives you the opportunity for the bezel, and the time will come again when people are much more careful with their money, because they've lost. I mean, think of what people were like in the wake of 2008. People were very careful with their money, and savings rate went through the roof, and people were very gun shy, and that'll happen again. And I just look, it could go either way. It could be when people are gun shy, they'd rather give it to an AI because they don't trust humans anymore. It could conceivably go that way. Or it could go completely the other way, where I'm not giving it to. I want to shake the hand and look in the eye of the person who's investing my money. That will depend on personality types. But as you said, Paul, the one thing you can guarantee is change. And even if that change is an echo of something that happened in the past, in the moment, it's a significant change. And we're about to see plenty of that, I think.
Tim, media picks?
Let's go for it.
Yeah. Now, Grant, when you were last on, you recommended the book Gentleman in Moscow, which I see has been made into a series.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, which I started to watch. I haven't finished it, and I was really pleased to see that it was on there. But it's on my list simply because you recommended the book. Ewan McGregor, I think.
He plays Count Rostov in there. I will watch it, but I haven't brought myself to watch it yet because I love the book so much, and I don't want to be disappointed. But at some point, I'll watch it. But the book's magnificent. The book is just fabulous.
I've got a copy of that, and it's like the 180 Degrees book. I haven't read it yet. I'm sure lots of it's and I know I have to, and I really want to, but it's what it's like. But having said all of that about media picks, what is yours for us this pod?
Okay, well, here's what I'll give you. There's a young English singer-songwriter called Louis Dunford, and he had a moment of notoriety because he wrote a song. He's probably in his, I would think, late 20s, and he's a big Arsenal fan, and he wrote a song called North London Forever. The song's actually called The Angel, but the chorus is North London Forever. And it's all about growing up in and around Islington and Highbury, and it's just this beautifully written portrait of a place he grew up in, and the chorus is all about North London Forever, and he's a big Arsenal fan, and the club picked this song up, and they now play this song the same way that Liverpool play You'll Never Walk Alone. They play this chorus of this song right before the kickoff, and the whole crowd are singing, North London Forever, whatever the weather, this place is our home. It's an extraordinary anthem, not just for the chorus, but the lyrics, which will put you, if you grew up anywhere in London, they will put you, and in fact, I'm sure in any city, they will put you in a place, and you will recognise that the things that are important to him, the character. It's a beautiful song, but beyond that, he's written some, truly remarkable songs. And there was a very unfortunate incident when he was 16 years old, and his best friend was killed by knife crime when the two of them were out for an evening. And he writes this beautiful ballad it's called The Ballad of Benjamin, about a guy called Ben Kinsella who, was tragically killed by a knife attack, and it became a big case and got a lot of press attention. But the song he's written about it is, I defy anybody to really listen to it and not have a tear in their eye. And he's just released his debut album, and I went to see him. I was in Scotland a couple of weeks ago. I went to see him live with a couple of mates of mine at the Barrowland Ballroom in Scotland, which, if anyone's not been to the Barrowland Ballroom, man, go! It is, what an experience that was. But this kid has written so many incredibly good songs. The lyrics are amazing. The chorus is catchy. So his debut album is called Be Lucky, and he's got a few EPs on. You'll find him on Spotify, and I cannot recommend him highly enough, either as a songwriter or a performer, or the music. It's just magnificent. So that is a definite media pick. I don't think I've really seen a good movie for a long time, so I don't really have any good movies for you. But TV wise, there's a show called Landman, which I don't know if you've seen it or had it recommended. With Billy Bob Thornton is the lead character, and it's written by Taylor Sheridan, who did Yellowstone, and he wrote Sicario, I think, the movie. That was his first writing script, which is again a terrific movie. But Landman, the characters in that are just so beautifully drawn and cast perfectly. It's just fantastic. And the first season's just finished. It got greenlit for another season, so that'll be coming back. And that, if anyone hasn't seen that, it's phenomenal. And then I'll give you two others, because I've just come back from some long plane rides to Australia, and then from London to Cayman. So that's when I watch everything. I never watch TV unless I'm on planes. But there's two great shows on Apple TV. One called The Studio, which just started with Seth Rogen, and It's a parody of the American movie business, and he's the head of a studio. And it's just brilliantly done and very, very funny, with a lot of great cameos from people like Martin Scorsese and Charlize Theron. And it's a very, very good show. It's only the first 2 or 3 shows so far, but I can't recommend that highly enough. And then another Apple TV show which I stumbled upon last week called Dope Thief, which I wasn't sure. I hadn't heard anything about it. I didn't know anything about it. But it's about 2 guys who are kind of small-time hoods, who their business is pretending to be DEA agents and robbing other drug dealers of their drugs and selling the drugs themselves. And it's a terrific story, really well acted. It's pretty violent. If anyone out there is a bit squeamish, it's pretty violent. But it's a really clever story, well acted, well cast, well filmed, and that'll keep you going. I would also throw the White Lotus Series 3 in there if you haven't heard about that one yet, because it's great. And the finale is this coming week, which I can't wait for. But that should keep you going for a while, that little lot.
Definitely. Tim, do you want to add to that?
I'm going to give our listeners an embarrassed richesse of media picks. So to follow in Grant's wake, I've got 3. The first one is a tweet, something topical, from Douglas A. Bonepath that just went up. I have announced the following tariffs: wife 50%, kid 1 30%, kid 2 25%, mother-in-law 100%, dog 0%.
There's a man after my own heart.
I thought that was quite nice. And the other 2 are very closely related. So the first one is something that came up on the shuffle for me on YouTube. It's a documentary, quite a short documentary, called Spine Tingler, the William Castle story. And for anyone that doesn't know William Castle was a American filmmaker in the 50s and 60s, and he was always throwing gimmicks at the crowd. So I've seen some of his films. They're not bad films, but it's the gimmicks that really made them. So in one of them, which is, I think it's just called The Tingler, which I think stars Vincent Price, he electrified some of the seats in the cinema. So at the key moments, people would literally be given electric shocks. And he was the kind of guy. He also used he'd have in one of the films, he had little plastic skeletons dragged over the roof of the cinema above people's heads. So it was a class act. And in at least one of the films, he had it'd have nurses stationed outside saying, well, you need to sign a waiver before you can go in, or you can take out this policy and you'll win $100,000 if you have a heart attack and die during the showing of this film. It's so terrifying. But this is a real story. So he was a real entrepreneur. He was like a kind of a low rent Hitchcock, but very funny. So that's Spine Tingler, the William Castle story. And then there's a more recent film than that, and actually that's a documentary, but there's a fictional film called Matinee, which I think I'm the only person in the world who's seen. Came out in 1993, directed by Joe Dante, the guy who did Gremlins. And Matinee basically features John Goodman as a thinly disguised William Castle. So there's a film within a film with Matinee, because it's set during the Cuban Missile Crisis. But there's a film within a film, classic sort of like a 50s black and white sort of B-movie horror called Mant. Half man, half ant, all terror. So that's Spine Tingler, the William Castle story, which came out in 2007. And you may even be able to find it on YouTube, because I think that's where I saw it. And then Matinee from 1993. But together there, see Spine Tingler first, because then Matinee will make more sense.
Beautiful.
That's just amazing.
So there's, take that, Paul.
Yeah,
follow that. Mic drop.
Yeah, follow that if you can. No. You've knocked me into a cocked hat.
Absolutely, I couldn't, of course. But what I wouldn't even try. But what I wanted to talk about, because Media Picks is about picking things that are great, but we
not necessarily. We keep an open mind about the dross.
Well, this is the thing. So I wanted to mention the debacle of Snow White and how a major even something that, look, IMDb ratings, if something is an 8 or 9, you're talking about The Godfather or a series like the Ozark, that's a really good score. That means they've got everything right. Then if something's a 6 or a 7, that means that they've got something wrong. Maybe the story's gone a bit wrong. Maybe some of the acting. There's something. It's good, but it's gone slightly wrong. If it's sub 6, there's more than 2 things that have gone wrong. If it's around 5, it's getting into the unwatchable territory. And if it's 3, it's god awful.
But the three will be a barbell combination of 0 from people who've seen it and 10 from the director's family.
Exactly.
Right.
Now, Snow White is a major release, has got 1.6. That is absolutely unheard of.
Wow.
1.6.
The stat I saw yesterday was that Disney's going to lose $115 million on that, but I don't know whether there's anything to that or not.
Well, if you look at the Top Gun remake and how much money that made and how good a story that was, I see the opposite in the woke side, because that obviously was completely the other side of cinema. It was going, look, there's a guy, God forbid, a white guy who's a hero in a film that has got a great story and it's action and it made a ton of money. And then on the other side, they've gone all in with the woke and it's just backfired spectacularly. And I find it amazing that they even have tried to do this.
Paul, I'm actually looking at this now. I couldn't believe that. I've just brought it up here and I'm looking at the user ratings. 1.6, as you say, there's 302,000 votes. So this is not, and 91.3% of them are 1.
Yes.
And there's 2% that were giving it a 10.
This is unprecedented.
1.6, that's a rough one.
Yeah. So, so look, Grant, you said you had about 3 hours to speak, and we were like, "Oh, we wouldn't take that long." But it's felt like 10 minutes. It's been so good. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for giving up your time and coming on the podcast. And I just hope it's not 4 years before you come back on again.
Yeah, that's amazing. I still can't believe that was 4 years ago. It's crazy. But look, thank you to you guys for asking me to come on. It's always a pleasure, and I've enjoyed every minute of it too. So thank you.
And if you're in London, please let us know. Because
I will be. I will be. As I said, I will be hanging out with my grandkids. So I will park them one evening, and 3 of us can get out and have a beer.
If people want to follow you, how do they do that?
Very easy. There's one place, grant-williams.com. Everything's there. And my Twitter handle is TTMYGH, which is just the acronym for things that make you go home.
So I'll put those in the top of the show notes ahead of everything else. So click on that, visit Grant's website, check out. Thank you for staying with us for this longer podcast. But Grant, once again, thanks so much for your time and all the very best, and hope to see you soon.
Anytime, fellas. Thank you again.
Cheers, Grant.
Cheers, Tim. Bye-bye, mate.
Thanks, everybody. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Please do your own research or contact a professional advisor.